My support built him, then he broke my heart. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Mark was toasting to his new fiancée and his $10 million company, entirely unaware I legally owned them both. I stood in the shadows of the lavish rooftop venue, the cool evening breeze biting at my cheap dress. In my trembling hands, I held a simple manila folder. It didn't look like a weapon, but the legal documents inside were about to detonate a bomb in the middle of this ridiculous celebration. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the obnoxious laughter of tech bros echoed around me. They were all celebrating Mark, the supposed genius visionary who had just secured a massive series of funding round for his revolutionary data sorting app. To them, he was a self-made prodigy. To me, he was the man who had stolen 5 years of my life, drained my bank accounts, and then tossed me into the trash the second his ship finally came in. I am Sarah, and for half a decade, I was the invisible engine running Mark's life. While he sat in our moldy, cramped studio apartment innovating, I was out working 3 exhausting jobs to keep the lights on. I smelled like diner grease and printer ink for 5 straight years, just so he could afford cloud hosting and endless energy drinks. I believed in his dream so completely that I made it my own. I gave him my youth, my credit score, and my unwavering loyalty. And how did he repay me? By deciding I no longer fit the aesthetic of a millionaire CEO. He replaced me with a shiny new model the moment the ink dried on his term sheet, acting like my sacrifice was just an embarrassing footnote in his success story. I watched Chloe, his beautiful, pampered fiancée, throw her arms around his neck, flashing a diamond ring that I had unknowingly paid for with my blood, sweat, and tears. He looked so smug, so perfectly confident that he had won. He thought I was just a naive, exhausted waitress who would quietly disappear into the background with a broken heart. He thought his lawyers had terrified me into submission. He thought wrong. I tightened my grip on the manila folder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I stepped out of the shadows. But tonight, I was going to burn his beautiful, stolen life to the ground. Part 2. To understand the depth of Mark's betrayal, you have to understand the sheer misery of the last 5 years. We lived in a shoebox apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the walls constantly wept with black mold and the radiators screamed all winter. It was a suffocating, bleak existence, but I bore the weight of it entirely on my own shoulders. Mark had this grand vision for an algorithmic logistics app that he swore would change the world. He just needed time. "I can't work a day job, Sarah," he used to plead, holding my hands while I cried from exhaustion. "It breaks my focus. Just give me 1 more year. When we hit it big, we're going to be rich, and I'll buy you the world." So, I gave him the year, and then another, and then 3 more. I woke up at 5 in the morning to open the local diner, pouring coffee for grumpy commuters until 2 in the afternoon. Then, I would rush across town to sit in a windowless cubicle, doing mind-numbing data entry until 8 at night. On weekends, I picked up shifts as a freelance transcriptionist. I lived on cold ramen noodles and instant coffee, so Mark could order takeout when he was in the zone. I wore shoes with holes in the soles while I bought him the latest mechanical keyboards and software licenses. I was completely running on fumes, a hollowed-out shell of a 24-year-old, but his promises kept me going. He would kiss my forehead when I crawled into bed at midnight, whispering about the mansions we would buy and the vacations we would take. He made me feel like an essential partner in this grand, beautiful struggle. I truly believe that every hour I spent scrubbing diner tables was a direct investment in our shared future. I convinced myself that the pain was temporary, that his success would be our success, and that my unwavering devotion would be rewarded with a lifetime of security and love. I was incredibly stupid to believe a single word he said. The harsh reality was that I was never his partner. I was just his temporary, unpaid intern and desperate financial sponsor. The devastating truth about his true intentions was rapidly approaching to destroy me. Part 3. The collapse of my entire world happened on a random Tuesday, exactly 3 days after Mark secured his massive $10 million valuation. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour double shift at the diner because someone called in sick. I walked into our cramped apartment, my feet throbbing and my apron smelling strongly of stale French fries, holding a cheap bottle of sparkling wine. I was so incredibly ready to finally celebrate the end of our poverty. Instead of finding Mark cheering or working at his desk, I found him standing in the middle of the tiny kitchen, completely packed. Two large, expensive-looking leather duffel bags sat by the door. He was wearing a brand-new tailored blazer that I certainly hadn't paid for. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. "Mark? What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling as the cheap wine bottle slipped from my fingers and shattered on the linoleum. He sighed heavily, a terrible sound of profound inconvenience. "Sarah, sit down. We need to have a serious talk." My stomach plummeted into my shoes. He stood perfectly straight, smoothing the lapels of his new jacket. "The company is taking off. I'm moving into a corporate apartment downtown closer to the new office and the investors. And I'm going alone." I stared at him, entirely unable to process the words coming out of his mouth. "What do you mean?" "We did it, Mark. We finally made it." He gave me a look of pure, condescending pity that I will never forget for as long as I live. "No, Sarah, I made it. Look, I appreciate that you helped out with the rent, but my life is moving at lightning speed now. We are just in completely different places. You belong here, working your shifts, and I belong in boardrooms. We just outgrew each other." He actually said that. After 5 years of me bleeding myself dry to feed him, he told me we outgrew each other. He tossed a set of keys on the counter, grabbed his expensive new bags, and walked out the door without looking back once. I collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by broken glass and cheap wine, entirely shattered. The nightmare of my new reality was only just beginning to unfold tonight. Part 4. I spent the first 48 hours after the breakup in an absolute state of catatonic shock. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop throwing up. I kept desperately staring at my phone, praying for a text from Mark saying he made a terrible mistake and that the stress of the funding round had just made him temporarily insane. Instead, the final, crushing blow came through a suggested post on my Instagram feed. The algorithm, in its infinite cruelty, showed me a picture Mark had just been tagged in. It was a photo of him standing on the balcony of a breathtaking, glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city skyline. But he wasn't alone. Wrapped around his arm was a stunning, impeccably groomed 26-year-old woman named Chloe. She had the kind of effortless beauty that only comes from generational wealth and zero stress. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with my brilliant CEO. #penthouseViews #powercouple." The photo had been taken 2 days ago. He hadn't just moved on. He had literally replaced me before he even broke up with me. While I was packing my meager belongings into a rented, rusted minivan because I couldn't afford next month's rent without his non-existent contribution, he was popping vintage champagne with a runway model in a luxury skybox. The physical pain in my chest was so sharp I literally had to gasp for air. I had spent half a decade destroying my health, my savings, and my youth so that this beautiful stranger could live the exact fairy tale that Mark had specifically promised to me. She was sleeping on high thread count sheets while I was dragging trash bags full of cheap clothes down 3 flights of moldy stairs. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my entire future and handed it to a younger, flashier woman who didn't know the first thing about the struggle it took to build that empire. I felt completely worthless, discarded like a broken appliance that had outlived its usefulness. I sat on the floor of my new, terrifyingly empty apartment, sobbing until my eyes swelled shut and my throat burned. I truly thought the excruciating pain couldn't possibly get any worse. The thick envelope waiting in my new mailbox would change everything forever. Part 5. The large envelope was made of heavy, expensive parchment paper and bore the imposing logo of a massive corporate law firm downtown. My hands shook as I tore it open, terrified that Mark was somehow trying to sue me for the back rent I couldn't afford on the old apartment. But it wasn't an eviction notice or a lawsuit. It was a dense, 70-page legal document titled Severance and Global Non-Disclosure Agreement. Attached to the front was a brief, incredibly condescending letter from Mark's lead counsel. The letter explicitly stated that in recognition of my past emotional support during the founding of his tech company, Mark was generously offering me a one-time, lump sum payment of $10,000. $10,000. That didn't even cover a fraction of the credit card debt I had amassed paying for his servers and software subscriptions over the last 5 years. It was an absolute insult, a tiny crumb tossed to a starving dog to make it go away quietly. But the money wasn't even the worst part. To get that pitiful check, I had to sign a draconian non-disclosure agreement swearing I would never publicly discuss my relationship with Mark or my involvement in the early days of his startup. More confusingly, buried deep in the appendices, was a comprehensive intellectual property release form. The contract demanded that I immediately forfeit any and all claims, rights, or ownership regarding the company's foundational code, algorithms, and business structures. I read the legal jargon 3 times, my tears of sorrow slowly morphing into a cold, hard knot of confusion. Why on earth would his highly paid, elite corporate lawyers care about getting an IP release from a diner waitress? Mark had always insisted I was completely uninvolved in the actual business mechanics of his startup. I was just the wallet. The sheer aggressive desperation radiating from these pages made zero sense to me. I knew I needed professional help immediately. I picked up my phone and frantically dialed my fiercely protective best friend. Part 6. Jessica is a force of nature. She is a 30-year-old paralegal at a cutthroat downtown litigation firm, and she possesses a terrifyingly sharp mind and absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. Within an hour of my frantic phone call, she was sitting on the floor of my bare apartment, a highlighter clamped between her teeth, aggressively tearing through the 70 pages of Mark's severance agreement. I sat nervously on my air mattress, chewing my fingernails down to the quick while she read in complete, intimidating silence. Finally, she tossed the thick stack of papers onto the carpet and removed the highlighter from her mouth. Her eyes were narrowed into dangerous slits. "Sarah," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "this contract is absolute, pure garbage. But it is also extremely revealing." I blinked, confused. Revealing how? He just wants me to shut up and go away for 10 grand, so his new model girlfriend doesn't have to hear about me. Jessica shook her head emphatically. "No. The NDA is standard billionaire tech bro paranoia. But look at Section 4, Clause B. The intellectual property release." She pointed a manicured finger at a densely worded paragraph. "This language is incredibly specific and wildly aggressive. They aren't just asking you to waive potential future claims. They are actively demanding you sign over pre-existing foundational ownership rights. They are utterly terrified of something." I stared at the legal jargon, my mind spinning. "But I don't own anything, Jess. I just paid for the internet and the ramen. Mark wrote every single line of code." Jessica leaned forward, her expression deadly serious. "Corporate lawyers do not draft 60-page IP waivers for diner waitresses just for the fun of it, Sarah. They are trying to retroactively cover a massive, gaping hole in his chain of title. Mark is hiding something huge, and he needs your signature to bury it forever." The sheer certainty in her voice sent a bizarre jolt of electricity straight down my spine. The pieces of the dark puzzle were finally starting to move into place tonight. Part 7. Guided by Jessica's intense suspicion, I decided to do some digging of my own before signing away my entire life for 10 grand. Mark had handled all our finances, claiming his system was too complex for me, but we still shared one old checking account that I deposited my waitressing tips into. He hadn't bothered to close it yet. I logged onto the bank's portal, my hands shaking violently as I requested the detailed PDF statements for the last 12 months. What I found in those ledgers made me physically violently ill. I had assumed the money I deposited was going strictly toward our rent and his cloud hosting server fees. But the truth was spelled out in horrifying black and white. 7 months ago, 5 months before he supposedly outgrew me and broke my heart, there were massive, inexplicable withdrawals. While I was pulling back-to-back double shifts at the diner and wearing shoes held together by duct tape, Mark was spending my hard-earned cash. I found a $1,200 charge at a luxury boutique, a weekend charge of $2,000 at a 5-star resort in the next state over, $800 at a high-end steakhouse. He hadn't just met Chloe after his company got funded. He had been dating her, romancing her, and funding her lavish, pampered lifestyle using the exact money I was bleeding myself dry to earn. He literally used my minimum wage tips to buy his new socialite girlfriend designer handbags while I was eating cold leftover French fries in the dark. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply evil, that I couldn't even cry. The blinding sadness I had felt for the past week instantly evaporated, replaced entirely by a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear rage. I printed out every single page of those bank statements, highlighting the fraudulent charges with trembling, furious hands. I showed the devastating evidence to Jessica, expecting her to be just as completely devastated and shocked as I was. Instead, she just stared at a random transaction from 5 years ago with a predatory smile. Part 8. Jessica aggressively tapped her perfectly manicured fingernail against a specific line item on a bank statement from exactly 5 years and 2 months ago. It was a simple charge of $350 to the State Department of Revenue. "Sarah," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you remember what this specific payment was for?" I squinted at the faded ink, struggling to pull the memory through the dense fog of my rage. "That was the initial LLC filing fee and the first software copyright registration," I replied slowly. Mark's credit was completely destroyed back then from his student loans. He couldn't even get a basic checking account opened without triggering collection agencies. So he begged me to pay the filing fees. Jessica's eyes widened, practically gleaming with a terrifying, beautiful realization. "And whose name went on those official state registration documents, Sarah?" I froze completely. My breath hitched in my throat as the memory hit me like a freight train. We were sitting in a cheap coffee shop. Mark was crying, terrified his idea would be stolen if it wasn't patented immediately. I had filled out the complex legal forms myself because he was too stressed to focus. "Mine," I whispered, the word barely audible. I put my name, my social security number, and my signature on the LLC formation and the core copyright. I was the sole registered agent and owner because he legally couldn't be. Jessica didn't say a word. She whipped open her laptop and frantically logged into the state's corporate registry database. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with blinding speed as she searched for the company's original foundational documents. A few seconds later, the official PDF loaded on her bright screen. There it was, in undeniable, indisputable black and white. The foundational patent for the revolutionary algorithm, the core asset that the entire $10 million empire was built upon, was registered exclusively to one person. The entire fragile corporate structure was a massive house of cards waiting to fall. Part 9. I stared at the laptop screen until my vision blurred, entirely unable to comprehend the magnitude of what I was looking at. According to the state government, the Federal Patent Office, and every legally binding document on Earth, Mark was not the founder or the owner of his brilliant tech empire. I was. I owned the core intellectual property. I owned the foundational LLC. Mark had built a massive, glittering $10 million penthouse entirely on land that legally belonged to me. This can't be right, I stammered, gripping the edge of the air mattress to stop myself from falling over. Surely he transferred it to his name when he got the new investors? Jessica let out a loud, sharp bark of genuine laughter. "He can't legally transfer an asset he doesn't own, Sarah? That is exactly why his elite lawyers are practically having a panic attack, trying to shove a 70-page IP waiver down your throat for 10 grand. The brilliant, blinding truth finally crashed over me in a glorious wave. Mark was currently in the middle of closing a massive series of funding round with ruthless venture capitalists. Those investors require absolute, ironclad proof of intellectual property ownership before they wire $10 million into a corporate bank account. During their intense due diligence, some sharp corporate lawyer must have realized the glaring, fatal flaw in Mark's paperwork. The Golden Boy CEO didn't actually own the code he was selling. He couldn't close the life-changing deal, he couldn't access the millions, and he couldn't keep his wealthy new fiancée in designer bags unless I signed that specific piece of paper. He had thrown me out like garbage, completely forgetting that I held the undisputed deed to his entire kingdom. I went from being a heartbroken, destitute diner waitress to the most powerful person in his entire arrogant universe in a matter of seconds. I was holding a live grenade, and Mark had absolutely no idea the pin was pulled. Part 10. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that I actually felt dizzy. I immediately blocked Mark's number on my phone, entirely ignoring the barrage of increasingly frantic texts demanding to know if I had signed the severance agreement yet. Let him sweat. Let his highly paid lawyers panic. I wasn't playing by his rules anymore. The next morning, Armed with Jessica's paralegal expertise and my pristine stack of printed state registry documents, we marched into the imposing downtown offices of a legendary corporate litigator named Harrison Vance. Vance was notorious for being a ruthless, bloodthirsty shark in the boardroom, exactly the kind of monster I needed on my side. I sat in his plush leather chair and laid out the entire story. The 5 years of grinding sacrifice, the stolen waitress tips used to fund the affair, the insulting $10,000 severance offer, and finally, the undeniable proof of my sole IP ownership. Vance reviewed the state documents in silence, a slow, terrifyingly predatory smile spreading across his weathered face. "Your ex-boyfriend is a spectacular idiot," Vance chuckled darkly, tapping the patent registration. "He is legally attempting to sell a stolen car to federal venture capitalists." Because the case was an absolute slam dunk, Vance agreed to take me on contingency, meaning he would take a percentage of the massive payout instead of an upfront fee. We spent the next 6 hours drafting the most devastating legal counterstrike imaginable. We prepared a formal cease and desist order, legally blocking Mark from utilizing, selling, or licensing my copyrighted code. But we didn't stop there. We drafted an aggressive demand letter asserting my rightful claim to a full 50% equity stake in the entire company, plus immediate reimbursement for the stolen funds. The trap was meticulously set, legally ironclad, and absolutely lethal to his entire carefully constructed future. All I needed to do now was figure out the perfect moment to spring the trap. Part 11. My phone had been dead silent for 2 days when a sudden, aggressive pounding on my cheap apartment door made me jump out of my skin. I peered through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Mark. He looked uncharacteristically frantic, his designer tie loosened and his hair messy. I cracked the door open just an inch, leaving the security chain firmly engaged. "Sarah?" "Thank God," he breathed, trying to push his charming, persuasive CO smile onto his panicked face. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Have you signed the papers yet? We really need to wrap up this administrative nonsense so we can both move on." I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing but pure disgust for the man I once loved. "I've been busy, Mark," I said coldly. His fake smile instantly vanished, replaced by the arrogant, cruel mask I was now intimately familiar with. He leaned close to the crack in the door, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening sneer. "Listen to me, you ungrateful nobody. My venture capital funding closes on Friday. If you hold up my deal because you're throwing a pathetic, jealous tantrum over Chloe, I will have my lawyers tie you up in litigation for the rest of your miserable life. I will personally make sure you are scrubbing diner toilets until you are 80 years old. Sign the damn paper, take the 10 grand, and disappear." My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs, but I channeled every ounce of willpower I possessed to keep my expression perfectly terrified and submissive. I let my shoulders slump in manufactured defeat and looked at the floor, playing the exact role of the broken, intimidated waitress he fully expected me to be. "Okay," I whispered, forcing a fake tremble into my voice. "You win, Mark. I'll sign the papers. Just please don't sue me." The smug, victorious satisfaction that instantly washed over his face made me want to vomit right then and there. He had absolutely no idea he had just walked blindly into the waiting legal slaughterhouse. Part 12. Mark exhaled a massive sigh of relief, clearly thrilled that his aggressive intimidation tactics had worked so perfectly on his seemingly weak ex-girlfriend. "Good," he snapped, adjusting his expensive tie and regaining his arrogant composure. "Have the signed documents messengered to my lawyer's office by tomorrow morning at the absolute latest." I looked up at him, injecting a perfect blend of fake hesitation and pathetic desperation into my voice. "I don't have money for a courier, Mark. And I want to give them to you personally. Tomorrow night is your massive company launch and engagement party at the Starlight Rooftop, right? Just leave my name at the security desk. I'll hand-deliver the signed folder directly to you, and then I swear I will walk out of your life forever." Mark paused, his eyes narrowing as he intensely evaluated my request. He hated the idea of me crashing his elite billionaire party, but his desperate, suffocating need for that signed IP release overpowered his vanity. The venture capitalists would be at that party, and he needed the clean paperwork to secure their massive check. "Fine," he finally spat, looking at me like I was a piece of garbage stuck to his shoe. I will leave your name at the VIP desk. But you wear something decent, you hand me the folder the second you see me, and you leave immediately before Chloe sees you and gets upset. Do not embarrass me, Sarah. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes firmly cast downward as he turned and practically sprinted down the hallway, completely eager to get back to his stolen luxury life. As soon as I heard the heavy stairwell door click shut, I locked my deadbolt and leaned against the wood, a massive, genuine smile breaking across my face for the first time in weeks. I wasn't going to embarrass him. I was going to utterly annihilate him. The stage was flawlessly set for the most spectacular, devastating public execution in corporate history. Part 13. The Starlight Rooftop was a glittering, obnoxious monument to tech bro excess. Ice sculptures, cascading champagne towers, and hundreds of elite, wealthy guests surrounded Mark and his beautiful new fiancée, Chloe. I walked past the heavy security detail, my name securely on the VIP list just as he promised, clutching the thick manila folder in my sweating hands. I spotted Mark holding court near the main bar, surrounded by 3 older men in incredibly sharp suits, the venture capitalists who were about to hand him $10 million. I marched straight through the crowd, my cheap dress standing out like a sore thumb, completely ignoring the horrified gasps of his co-workers who recognized me. "Mark," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the thumping club music. He spun around, a massive, relieved smile breaking across his arrogant face as he saw the folder in my hands. "Ah, Sarah, so glad you could drop off that administrative paperwork," he practically shouted, performing for the wealthy investors. He confidently reached out and snatched the folder from my hands, tearing it open without looking. "Now run along. We are doing real business here." But as his eyes scanned the top page, his triumphant smile completely froze. It wasn't the 70-page severance agreement. It was the heavily bolded, legally terrifying cease and desist order drafted by Harrison Vance, followed by the undeniable state registry documents proving I owned his entire core patent. I watched in absolute, euphoric satisfaction as the blood rapidly drained from his face, leaving him a pale, trembling mess. What is this?" he choked out, the paper shaking violently in his hands as his perfect facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. I stepped closer, looking him dead in his terrified eyes in front of the investors. "That is my company, Mark," I said clearly, "and you are officially fired." The utter devastation on his face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Part 14. Absolute, chaotic panic instantly erupted across the lavish rooftop. The lead venture capitalist, a shrewd man named Mr. Sterling, forcefully snatched the legal documents out of Mark's trembling hands. Sterling's eyes darted rapidly across the cease and desist order and the attached state patent registry proofs. Within 10 seconds, Sterling's face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You lied to us during due diligence, Mark," Sterling barked, his voice echoing over the sudden silence of the party. "You don't own the underlying intellectual property. This entire funding deal is immediately frozen, and we will be suing you for corporate fraud first thing Monday morning." Mark looked like he was going to vomit. He practically fell to his knees, desperately grabbing at my cheap dress. "Sarah, please, you can't do this. I'll give you 20 grand. 50. Just sign the release," he begged, completely stripping away his arrogant CEO persona in front of hundreds of people. The humiliation was absolute and entirely public. Suddenly, Chloe pushed her way through the confused crowd, her massive diamond ring catching the flashing party lights. "Mark, what is going on? Why is this waitress yelling at you?" she demanded. When Sterling coldly informed her that Mark was effectively bankrupt and currently facing massive corporate fraud lawsuits, Chloe didn't offer her fiancé any comfort. Instead, she threw her champagne glass on the floor, screamed that he was a pathetic liar, and stormed out of the penthouse party without looking back. Within exactly 5 minutes, Mark had lost his $10 million empire, his wealthy investors, his gorgeous model fiancée, and his entire professional reputation. He sat completely alone on the floor of his ruined celebration, weeping uncontrollably while security slowly began escorting the confused, whispering guests toward the elevators. The empire he built on my broken back had officially collapsed entirely tonight. Part 15. The legal aftermath was swift, brutal, and incredibly lucrative. Facing multiple devastating lawsuits from angry investors and the total inability to legally operate his own software, Mark had absolutely no choice but to surrender completely. Through my brilliant attorney, Harrison Vance, we negotiated a massive, multi-million-dollar buyout settlement. Mark's desperate remaining investors agreed to pay me a fortune to officially transfer the patent rights and quietly step away, allowing them to salvage what was left of the ruined code. Mark, heavily burdened with severe legal fees and massive personal debts from funding his fake luxury lifestyle, was permanently ousted as CEO of the company he founded. I heard through the grapevine that he recently moved back into his parents' basement, completely broke and disgraced in the tech industry. As for me, I never went back to that greasy diner. I took my massive settlement and bought a beautiful, sunlit house with a large garden, entirely in my own name. I paid off all my debts, sent my best friend Jessica on a luxury vacation, and finally started living the peaceful, secure life I had always desperately craved. The trauma of those 5 grueling years will always be a part of my story, but it no longer defines my future. If my journey can offer any warning to anyone listening, let it be this: never set yourself entirely on fire just to keep a man warm. Do not sacrifice your youth, your health, or your financial stability to blindly fund someone else's fragile dream. Your unwavering loyalty will not legally protect you when their ambition finally outgrows your usefulness. Always put your own name on the paperwork, legally secure your financial assets, and never let any arrogant person convince you that your incredibly hard work is expendable. The best revenge is massive, undeniable success entirely on your own terms.